everyone at Wild Ones Capital, because honestly, I'm just delighted to have the chance to come and talk to you all. So thank you so much for the opportunity. You gave me a great introduction, Rosemary. So basically, my pathway to getting involved with native plants took a very long segue because I started in my 20s. Now I'm going to be 55, so that's a long time ago. So about 30 years ago, I had my first home and I was all excited about planting native plants, and I'd heard just a little bit about it and actually found a landscaper to work with and planted all of these beautiful wildflowers and put in a bunch of serviceberry and put in a pond. And I soon learned that I knew nothing about gardening. And it was a fiasco. And I got called in by the town for breaking nuisance laws. People were throwing trash on my lawn because they thought it was an empty lot. And I finally had to put up a little sign explaining what we were doing and what had gone wrong. And then everybody got a lot more supportive. So that was my first lesson in one, communication is your best friend. And two, that I was not ready for a full yard of pollinator gardens. And I stopped gardening, and I did not garden again until I was probably in my early 50s. And I remember telling my husband just a few years ago, saying, I'm never going to garden. I don't know. I'm just never going to do it. And then suddenly it just turned on like a switch. And now it's going much better. We're not having people yell at me for what's in my garden, and it's growing a little bit at a time in a way I can handle. So, but that was my first experience trying to understand how the community might respond to a pollinator garden. And right now we're having such a big push with, Homegrown National Park and so many others, that more and more neighbors might understand it, but towns really don't know what to do. And honestly, homeowners associations, I think, are often baffled. So I have been working with my own town. I live in Corinth, New York, and trying to work with them to understand that you can just do a little bit at a time and start thinking about it differently. And as I did that, I started thinking, all right, what can I do? What would help? I'm a consultant in my daily life anyway. What would be useful? So I've started giving a few more talks. I've started putting together a few things for my own town and just getting them to think about it. So this is my way of sharing what I've learned so far, get you thinking about it. So that having been said, there will be plenty of time for questions, and I'll answer them as best I can at the end, but let's get going. So let's see. The main thing I want you to do, I'm going to talk to you, probably, given that you're all part of Wild Ones, I'm going to talk to you about things you probably are already thinking about, but I want you to start thinking a little bit bigger and think about how that might come across to a town or an HOA. And particularly, I'm going to talk about native plants versus lawns. I'm not going to get into, with this talk, I'm not going to get into non-native plants, but really focusing more on switching from this sense that everything should be grass to what else it could be, and how do you get that conversation started. So right now, I don't know if everyone on here is from the New York region or if they're from other areas, but water is a big issue right now. There is a lot of drought going on in New York, but all across the country, it's a huge issue. Certainly out west, California is having profound problems with water. So talking about water in terms of the municipality, it's not just, oh, you have a smaller water bill. It's literally, some municipalities are worried about running out of water. And anything that uses less water than grass becomes something beneficial. So one of the things you can think about is, if you're trying to approach your town, is drought an issue in your area? And if it is it something that maybe you can use as a little bit of leverage to get the conversation going? So that's one of the starting points, especially out in the West right now. Another thing going on, it's always nice not to have to mow if it's your own yard, but when you think in terms of a town, you really have to think in terms of the quantity of fuel that they are using to mow. And right now, even though fuel has come down a teeny tiny bit, it's obviously still very expensive, and towns don't need to just fuel their mowers. They have to fuel their snow plows, and they have to fuel, all the other tools that they're using for maintaining their roads and every other thing. So if you can cut back on fuel, that's another angle, because the bottom line is where a lot of these decisions are made. That's not the only ones. We'll talk about some other ones, but right now, helping people understand that, especially if they're understaffed, which is another issue going on across the country right now, especially if they're trying to save funds, explaining what less mowing means. It doesn't just mean, oh, you don't have to mow this Sunday. It means a lot more money, maybe fewer staff. It means that with a little investment now, that's something that you can save on long term. And that, I think, is one of the main things with towns and HOAs, is you have to think bigger and more long term. Now, this is another one. If people switch from lawns to native plants, if this is a town that regularly sprays their lawn to make it look, like that perfect green carpet, obviously they can save the cost of that. So that's another thing. I often try and argue these things to be towards cost, because the bottom line is often such an issue. Sometimes, though, you're up against just the habit of what they're used to doing, but still, if you can back it up with savings, that is always going to be useful when you're talking to a town. Certainly with the spraying, that's one of them. One of the other things I like to help people understand is that native plant systems compared with lawn, they're going to have deeper root systems. They're going to do more filtration. They're going to help reduce groundwater contamination. Now, I'm not saying they're going to pull out every pollutant in the world, but they're certainly going to be useful. So that is another thing. If you do have a town that's getting interested in water safety or interested in just the health issues surrounding environmental choices, that can be an angle that they are going to maybe resonate with. One of the things I especially think people need to think about that you wouldn't think of as a homeowner is how native plants absorb runoff. Now, that's kind of related to the other thing we just spoke of, but when you're comparing to lawn, when you have a lot of rains, and what goes with drought, well, bizarrely, it's flooding. So we're having these extreme weather patterns. That means they're dealing with more water in a lot of places. And it's more than lawns can absorb, but it's not necessarily more than a good pollinator rain garden can absorb. And it's not just a matter of water. It's about how that floods the whole sewer system. It can overwhelm it. It can also cause the pavement to buckle, which leads to more repair costs. There are a lot of long-term costs that go along with these things that towns are not used to thinking about, because these haven't been issues until now. And it's because they're not really trained to think of it like that. Towns tend to think things are going on the way they have always been. And we know that that's not really what's happening right now. So that's another angle, is you can talk to them. If they're having struggles with their wastewater management, the stormwater runoff might be a good angle. Another thing that you can use is that they reduce soil erosion. Now, that's something we might know if we have like a hill or a slope in our own yard, but there are hills and slopes that towns and villages have to manage as well. And it can be another way for them to do that, and is certainly a lot easier than mowing, a slope. Nobody likes to do that. So those are a lot of details, but if your town is, you think, a little more climate savvy, you can start talking about carbon sinks. And we tend to think of carbon sinks as like a tree. You want a forest, they will absorb the carbon. But actually, a lot of research is showing that grasslands, which are basically prairies and fields of wildflowers, they are also very good at absorbing carbon, and they grow to maturity much faster than a tree. So that is another thing that can be a very big benefit that you can talk to with your town if they're already moving in the direction of trying to address climate change and wanting to work on that. Now, another thing I like to point out is that native plants provide shade. And I always think of this when I was president of the Homeowners Association. We lived in Vermont for many years, and it was 30 units, and it was like 5 pods of 6 units each. And it had a number of acres. It had a nice little lot of land around it. But there was this one big field that was just grass. And we put up a little fenced area for a dog park. We put up, little climbing things for kids and a big picnic bench, big picnic table, but very few people wound up using it. And the reason was because it was just a field. Sure, your kids were playing, but who wanted to sit in the sun watching them? It was just too uncomfortable. So when you think about native plants, we tend to think in terms of wildflowers, but trees are also native plants, and they can be a beautiful addition to a park and make it actually useful. So you don't always need just a flat, patch of grass, as we know, but trying to communicate that to your town that people might use the park more if it had shade. People might use it in different ways. And shade doesn't necessarily need to be a tree. It can be a beautiful arbor that's covered with a native vine. So there are a lot of ways you can do that, but it's another angle. If there's an area that people want to be using it or not, you can talk with your town and see if maybe it's an issue of there's too little protection from the sun and that's why people aren't there. So what about what else can they do, Mather? So we know these are the issues, but what can we do about them? And it's a little bit of community activism, but it's a little more targeted. So one thing I like to always say is you have to go a little bit bigger with towns than pollinator gardens, because what I find happens is you reach out to a town and you talk with them and they'll be like, oh, no, we just planted a pollinator garden. We're on top of that. And they think it's a done deal. They think, well, we planted, 2 square yards of wildflowers, we're good. And they don't get the whole thinking of in terms of we have to start replacing lawn with pollinators, that this is a bigger issue in terms of, the whole food chain and the whole ecosystem. So if you start with pollinator gardens, sometimes it gets them excited, but it can also close down the conversation a little bit because they'll feel that they've already done it. So this is what I suggest. Bring up the topic of nuisance laws, bring up the topic of their policies. This is often where people first connect with their town and native plants, is because somebody's growing, in a little pollinator garden and their Joe Pye weed got really big and their neighbor freaked out, or it's milkweed and it looks kind of rustic and their neighbors aren't liking that. And so they get reported. And then the town comes and says, well, you're violating this law. But what you can do to avoid all that is talk to your town and say, well, how do we define weed? And what if we also defined pollinator garden? Or what if we also defined native plant, so that we have an exception for people who are doing this? And that's not very hard to do. And if you suggest it, and you can find some language, and I can give you some resources on my sites when we're done that can help you get started with that, or you can reach out to me because I have some of that. If you give them some language, they can take that to their attorney. Every town has an attorney that they work with on contract to review all that, and they can take a look at it, because that's a really simple thing. Because some people are scared to move forward because, my neighborhood has people who have perfect lawns and people who have just not mowed in 5 years. So it's a whole range, but some neighborhoods are very precise and your neighbors will get upset. So changing the nuisance laws is one of the biggest ways you can be helpful here. Now, another thing is, it is within the possibility for towns to change the requirements for sidewalk strips. This is what we see here, which is, the classic lawn, the green carpet, and then the one tree with nothing planted around it. And if it is planted, it's usually like a petunia or something, or a marigold. So you can talk with them about what they might need. Now, you have to do a lot of listening when you talk to towns, because again, they're not just planting a garden in their yard. They have to really think about sight lines, access points, access to fire hydrants. There's a lot of thought that has to go into what they're doing that you don't have to think about as a homeowner. So thinking about this, they might not know that there are native plants that might be very short, but there are, and that might be helpful to them. They might say, well, I don't want it falling onto the sidewalk because that'll block people's access. Well, then you can talk with them about planting down the center of the strip and maybe having a mowed border, or maybe a mulched border around it. So there are things you can do, but you have to talk with them a little bit. And usually if you go and you can email, or you can call them and maybe even set up an appointment. If you're in a small town like me, it's probably pretty easy to get a hold of people and start talking with them about possibilities. And they might be able to change the requirements for how those are maintained, and even start setting aside a budget to switch them over. It's possible, but they're not being asked to do it. And they would need a little help to figure it out, because there's a little bit of upfront cost, but they're not even thinking about it. I think our job is to get them thinking about it. So from there, public spaces. Right now, there's no real requirements in most areas to have native plantings, but if they're public spaces and the town is in charge of them, the town is the one who owns that property, they can certainly pass a law that says anything we plant there needs to be native. That's totally possible, but they're not thinking about it. So again, you can reach out to them and get them thinking about what that would mean for them and what that would be, yeah, how they might implement that and how they might enforce that or make that happen. So another thing that is going on all over the country right now are the creation of solar farms and wind projects. And these are things that, you know, people don't think a lot about, but one of the nice things about solar and wind projects is that they really, they disturb a lot of land that you can then plant with native species. And one of the things I talked to my town about is this. I tried to help them rewrite their law, and my town was like, we don't know how to enforce this because we don't have the information. So I put together a guide for them on solar farms, what can they do, and just put it together to say, you know, why is it so important? Because they don't know. And talking them through about, you know, all the things that we talk about and why should they do it and how they can think of it and how they would maintain it. And that is definitely something that you can work on and talk to them about. We have a local solar farm trying to build in our town, and I've reached out to them several times, and they know about this guide, and they've committed to planting native plants. Now they can't do 100% because they can't afford to do that, but they certainly are doing more than they would have if that wasn't such an issue. So getting people thinking about it, and it's not just solar and wind projects. Cell towers, I'm sure we've all seen those, you know, big paths cut through forests, but that's an opportunity to put in wildflower habitat. So if you talk to your towns about that, maybe they can start paying more attention, because whenever you disturb it, you put it at risk of getting invasive plants growing in. But if someone's helping maintain it or reseeding it, you can get something growing there that could be a huge contribution to the ecosystem. Another thing I want to point out is landfills. I think, often think of them as kind of a hands-off thing that you wouldn't want to grow anything on that, but actually there is a good amount of information out there that in fact you can plant on them in certain cases, and that can be a way to reclaim that property as well. So again, these are things that homeowners don't think about because it's not a homeowner issue, but your town is having to deal with these issues. So you can put this on the agenda for them and get them thinking along these lines. Another thing that this is my my mountain that I hope we can climb in my lifetime. But if we have to tolerate people spraying their lawns, which I'm really hoping at some point will be, you know, prohibited, but what I'm hoping is there would be some way to register that you have a pollinator garden, and maybe there could be a rule about there's a buffer zone, and if you have a registered pollinator garden, your neighbors can't spray within a certain area around your garden. So that's my dream, but I think if we talk about it, we can get that going, because it kills me to see this when, you know, we know it doesn't stay on their property. So that's another thing to at least get them thinking about. Invasive plants are another thing. I think that, you know, we might try and do that on our own property, but towns who have, you know, a lot more, you know, ground to cover can really put this on their list of something they want to keep an eye for, especially if there are certain species in your area that are causing more problems. So that's something you can also talk with them about. This probably needs them to have a little more education. You're probably going to have more success with this if they have a Department of Public Works that has some environmental scientists on it, or they have a Department of Conservation. But this is something that if it's important to you, it's good to let them know that it's important to you, because otherwise it can just become one of many tasks they have to do. Talking with towns and homeowners associations, it's very much about being the squeaky wheel. You don't want to be rude or abrasive, because they'll tune you out, because they get complaints all the time. Most of the communications they get are going to be complaints. People will never show up at the town council meetings to say, hey, great job, but they will show up to say, why is this being built in my backyard? And they will be livid about it. Same thing with homeowners associations. Nobody wants to participate. Nobody wants to help. But if something goes wrong, you know, your phone is going to just light up like crazy. So helping work with them to explain what maybe you would like them to do, and just to keep that on the top of mind, is a way to educate and hopefully get them to see that they have a lot of power here. And, you know, there's a whole thing right now, I was just looking at it today, called climate mayors. And these are mayors from all around the country. And these are, you know, from smaller towns to, you know, big cities. I mean, it's like Houston, it's like Los Angeles, they're big places. And these are mayors that are coming together because they are working to have changes and trying to advocate for what they're going to need to weather climate change. So there is an openness right now to talk about this and to listen. So the more you bring it up now, the more they'll be aware of it. Now, Education, I think, is one of the biggest things. I know that most of us who have a pollinator garden try and put up a little sign or something and try to educate our neighbors that way. But a town has a little more possibility. And a homeowners association certainly can hand out flyers or send emails to their whole group. Well, one of the easiest things you can do is provide your town with a plant substitution list, or help them think that maybe that would be a good thing. And that might be something they can then let the town know through the town council, through their website, maybe at municipal events, maybe through flyers in key areas. Depending on your town, that could be the post office, it could be churches, it could be, the local salon. It depends where people gather, but helping people understand, burning bush is really important here, or it's really popular here, but maybe you could use this instead. By that same token, giving people information on finding them. There was a research study that Xerces put out this year that was talking about how even native plants sold that do not have neonicotinoids in them, like at Home Depot, they're still covered with other pesticides. So helping people find local sources where, like your seed swap or like local organic gardeners that have native plants, people don't know where to find them. And you can't just go to the local nursery and find them. And in fact, I had friends try to find, they were trying to get a native plant for me as a gift. And they went to the local nursery, and the local nursery just told them, oh, you don't want those. Those will look terrible in a garden. You don't want native plants. So, you've got to help people find where they're going to get the information. And maybe that's going to be online. I mean, we're lucky that in our area, there are places nearby that sell these, but some places don't have that. And maybe a few websites would be very useful to your community. Another thing is, the more you can help people understand why it's important, the better. So if you can send information to your mayor, or offer to give a presentation, offer to, explain it, or give flyers or something to let them know, then you're educating your town council. They probably don't know. They probably think, oh yeah, pollinator gardens are nice. It's nice to have some bees flying around, but they don't get the depth of it. So that is partly what your job is in advocating, is to just start with raising awareness of the issue, because the information is out there, but it hasn't spread to local governments yet. You can also encourage very specific things, like you can work with your town and say, let's do a Leave the Leaves campaign. How do we encourage that? Or a No Mow May. Some towns really got behind that. And certainly the more towns that do it, this is a sign that I got from Cross Plains, the more it's easy for other towns to do it. There's a lot of peer pressure in the way governments work. So if one town does it, it's easier for the next town to do it, and they see how they can do it. So the more you can advocate for that and give examples of other towns doing that, the better, and the more they're likely to listen to you. So, and I see some chats coming in, just let we're taking questions at the end. So if you have any, we will definitely get to that. I don't know how many of you are part of homeowners associations, but I did want to talk about some things specific to them. I mean, there's a lot of overlap. The lawn maintenance overlaps obviously with towns, but homeowners associations are obsessive about property value, because they are convinced that if it doesn't look perfect, it will affect everybody's property value, and nobody will be able to sell, and everyone will suffer. And people, their biggest investment is their home usually. So people are very cutthroat about this in homeowners associations. So you have to present information in a different way there. And one is, you can save money, but you also want to explain it will be beautiful and you'll save money. So the saving money is a big deal. Our homeowners association had a nice cushion, but you just never knew what was going to come down the pike. So you were always worrying about your bottom line. So lawn maintenance is part of that. Frankly, part of it was also, it is very difficult to find people who will do lawn maintenance for a small area, especially if you're rural. We were about 30 minutes outside of Burlington. So it was always hard finding people who were willing to do it. Being able to substitute some of that lawn, and the most obvious lawn with pollinator gardens, would have been something that, we would have paid attention to. Now, another thing is, a lot of homeowners associations, it's kind of like the example I gave with that field that nobody wanted to sit in because it was so sunny. If you use native plants to make gardens and pathways and seating areas, it becomes a very attractive community, and it becomes a space that everybody wants to use. That helps with all the retail, not the retail, the resale value that everybody's worried about. So helping people understand that native plants can become a beautiful viewing area, and they can become an educational area. These are things that will resonate with homeowners associations. Privacy is also a huge thing. People all live together in condos, but they get very concerned about their privacy. Same thing with like single family developments that are part of a homeowners association. So privacy screens, as I said, a beautiful fence or a beautiful arbor or a gazebo that it has native vines on it can be a way to bring in more native plants, more pollinators, while still helping the town, helping the homeowners association address an issue that they do have, which is privacy. Another thing is, depending on the homeowners association, many of them have a lot of families, a lot of young families, and the issue of being healthy for the children becomes a very big priority. And if you can start explaining why spraying the lawn is not healthy for the kids, that can make a big impact. And the same thing with education. People with young children are always looking for opportunities to bring them out into nature and give them something to learn. So if you make a beautiful pollinator garden right there, you can help teach, how plants grow, what seeds are, how pollinators grow, and get that going. That can be something that could be very beneficial to the whole community. So that's another way to angle it with a homeowners association. So, all right, so those are topics you can raise, but let's talk about how you can do that a little bit. The first one, just show up. Just show up at the town council meetings. Just show up at the homeowners association meetings. I have been going for, goodness, about a year now, maybe a little more, to the town council meetings in my area. And maybe one other person shows. And except for one big thing, they had a big outcry about something a few months ago in Corinth, and then maybe 2 other people showed, and they were angry. So, when you come in, you might find that your town council is a little nervous. Like when I first started showing up, they were nervous. They thought I was going to be angry at them all the time because people yell at them all the time. So if you just start showing up and they see that you're not yelling at them, that can make a big difference. And there will be a public comment session, and you can then talk about what you want to talk about. And sometimes you just want to listen. Listening is a big, important part, because then you learn how they think and what they're dealing with. When I started paying attention to my town council, because we've just lived here a little under 2 years now, they had just been elected in. So they had all of this stuff grandfathered in that they were trying to sort through as a new council. So that's something you need to understand, is the rhythm of your council. And the same thing with homeowners associations. They might have a new group leading it, or they might be completely stuck and have just one person doing everything. I mean, there was a long period of time at my homeowners association where we couldn't get anybody to be on the board. Nobody wanted to do it, and they seemed to think it was running smoothly. So nobody thought it was a big deal, but I was the one doing everything. So you have to kind of understand what the situation is going on there. Another thing that can be helpful is to talk about a specific change. This is something I've been learning, is education is great, but give them something concrete to work on. Can you make a guide? Can you give a presentation? Can you ask for them to do a no mow May? Something very concrete. That gives people a chance to work with you. It gives you a chance to do something and people feel it's a success, and you can build on it. Again, just speak up. I can't say that enough. Speak up, not in a way that's upset, but I'll give you an example. This isn't so much native plants, but we were having a talk at the local village here about the fall festival, which is this week. And they were talking about what they're going to do with the dumpsters and who's going to have the dumpsters, because obviously if you have a festival, you need to deal with the trash. And I said, so are we going to also have recycling bins? And they said, it's such a short amount of time, we're not going to do that. And so I brought it up one more time in the public comment and said, would it be that hard to just have a second dumpster, for the recycling, or to ask the vendors to have one bag for trash and one bag for recycling? And they decided not to, but then the guy who was actually handling it was in the audience, and he said, yeah, I'll look into that. So just talking about it can create possibilities that you're not expecting, but that can make a big difference. And again, not a lot of people show up, especially if you're in a small town. People are not showing up. So if you can be there, you have an outsized presence just because of that. If you can't go there, you can always write, you can email. Certainly you can write your clerk and ask that it be shared with the entire council, and they'll usually be very good about doing that. Homeowners Association as well. Again, not a lot of people are doing that, so you stand out when you do, and they're more likely to pay attention to it, especially if you keep bringing it up. It eventually, that's, you know, I'm in marketing for my day job, and I will say that the tenet of marketing is you just keep repeating your message, and eventually people hear it a little bit more. Like at first they brush it off, and then they're like, oh, I keep hearing it. It's like a song that you don't like, but you hear it 40 times, and then it's kind of, it's not so bad. That's kind of what you want to do here a little bit. One thing you can offer, I've done this as part of GreenTown Consulting, is to just give a presentation, you know, talk to them a little bit about this. You know, this is a lot of what I do is I reach out to towns and say, would you like me to just give a talk on 9 things that your town could do, just to get your council aware of this? And some are going to be amenable to that. So that's another option. If you have a local event like our fall festival or some other event, maybe ask if you can put some information or have a local table there, or have a table at the local event so that you can give some information there. So there are a lot of ways to communicate with your town, and you'll notice that a lot of this is educational and a lot of it is small. It's not, oh, immediately cover everything with native plants, because it's going to be too overwhelming, but you kind of start moving things in that direction. And another great thing is write your representatives at not just the local level, but the state level and the federal level, because that's where a lot of the money is going to come from to change over to pollinator gardens and to make that initial investment. Get them to say, hey, you know, we're going to create a grant for this. In New York right now, we have climate smart communities, and I actually emailed them today to say, some of this seems to overlap with native plants and pollinators, but am I right in thinking that that would be an action we could take that would be covered by this? So write them, because they're doing legislation, and, you know, pollinators are kind of popular right now. If they know you like it, they might be able to get something passed there. Now, there's a lot of pushback on it. Obviously, the Birds and Bees Protection Act in New York has not passed yet, but some other things where there might be funding, that might be something you can do. So it's worth a shot. So I just want to say those are a lot of the ways to get your community thinking about native plants. It's not just the garden, it's thinking a little bit bigger. It's thinking about how they're going to do different things within their town and about making it easier for others. And I wanted to give you a couple of resources. These are 2 websites of mine, purplepollinator.com. It's really got templates. So if you want to reach out to your homeowners association or your town council, you can click like this is about requesting a landscaping change. And it gives you a template that you can just fill in the different things here, and it gives you an example of how to do that. So if you want to write to your homeowners association, you can grab this right there. That's what it's for, and it can help guide you a little. If you also just want someone to talk to your town, that's what I do through GreenTown Consulting to just help them make their community pollinator friendly. There's also some blog posts you might find interesting that are more about, you know, how to get your Department of Public Works on board, or how to design a pollinator garden skeptics will love, how to motivate an HOA. So it's a slightly different angle than some of the other information you might find about native plants. So I believe that's it, Rosemary. I think that's my presentation. I'm happy to take questions if anyone has any, but that's about it. But I'll stop the share.
Okay, should we just informally do the questions, do you think? I know Barbara and Frida and have made some comments. Barbara, do you want to speak, or would you like me to read?
We have someone in our Wild Ones group who lives in a small city. It's not an HOA, it's a small city. And she's being sued for her native plant garden. And they're using the Kentucky statute of the nuisance law. So how you're talking about I don't know if HOAs, if they get around state statutes. I know they get around some municipal statutes.
Well, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't really talk about that. This is one of the ways where you can do a lot of good by helping to change those policies before this kind of situation happens. Homeowners associations, I believe, have the ability to create their policies for their own community. So there are rules on that. Now, whether they are legal, because I actually remember I think this was a Wild Ones presentation that was just this last spring, and it was someone saying, don't panic if somebody reaches out to you and says you're violating the nuisance law, because there are things you can do. I am not that expert, but I'm guessing your Wild Ones group can track that down. But I don't think you necessarily have to rip it out right away, because sometimes those policies are not legal, and sometimes they're so vague that you can't really enforce them. So that's all I can tell you. That's not my expertise. That's why I say the main thing you can do, even beyond getting a pollinator garden planted in your town or your homeowners association, is get them to change their policies so that that isn't a problem.
I know Maryland had outlawed their HOA mandates for lawn.
Mhm. And again, that's a policy change. And it looks like Christy just shared one about that webinar. That's the one I saw this year. That was a phenomenal webinar. That is worth listening to. So that's right in the chat. So
Nice. Okay. And Frida, did you want to speak to your water authority issue? You'll have to unmute.
Hi, I'm in Erie, Pennsylvania, and one of my hobbies is reading the legal notices. So I saw that the Water Authority had a contract to require mowing. I think it was like once a week to 2 inches was the maximum height. And some of the properties they had were up to 10-acre pieces. Some of them were just tiny. So I did go to the board meeting and I talked about it, and they said, well, we can't do anything with this contract, it's too late, which I don't agree, but they were interested in doing something in the future. And so I'm not really sure where to go. I mean, how, because they don't, I mean, if you're going to put it in a meadow or something like that, you really do have to maintain it. And yeah, so how do you start if you actually have a jurisdiction that is at least halfway interested in dealing with you?
well, one, you're in Erie, Pennsylvania, which is actually one of those climate mayor towns. So there's something there that you can talk to. My feeling is you have to start small, because it's such a big change for them. And they don't, it's not like in our home, we can just rip out all the lawn that we want, but it's a bigger deal. So I would start small. I would start with education. And then I would also get them thinking about, how are they going to enforce it? That's what keeps stumbling things in Corinth, is they're like, well, we could require it, but how do we enforce it? We have nobody on staff who can do an inspection and make sure that they planted native plants. And that's something that I keep working with them on. It's like, well, can they check a receipt that says it was bought and this is what it was? Is there someone you can bring on as a contractor who can, once a month do a review of these things? So it gets tricky, and you just have to keep the dialogue open. I'm not saying I'm having a perfect response here to this. I'm working just like you are to try and get this to change. And it is a little uphill, but there's openness, but it is very slow. That's why it's good to work on our own gardens when we can, but to just start putting it out there and to start getting that there, a little education, a little more information. It's just a very slow process right now, but I think it will gain momentum.
What is it that you said about Erie that was specific?
There's this thing called climate mayors, and Erie is part of that. Erie, Pennsylvania.
Good to know. Great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I just found that out today, actually. So.
All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay, and then as we go down through our chat, you've got wonderful, wonderful compliments about inspirational, fantastic. Thank you for a great presentation, very helpful. And then Christy has posted some links for us, including the weed ordinance that you talked about. Does anybody else have any other comments or questions for Michelle? For Jennifer, I'm sorry.
Hello, my name's Heather. I have a question. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I live in Erie County as well, and I am in a township called Mill Creek. And I put in some native gardens, and I'm actually one of those people that got, I have a neighbor that's very, very anti-native and very upset with it. So we've gone around for a couple of years now, and the code department of my township has been quite sympathetic, actually. And I put together pamphlets and sent them all the information about what plants I've put in, what plants I've replaced, what plants I've taken out. And I went through the trouble of actually putting in labels for the individual plant, because we do not have wording that specifies what a weed is. So for them, a weed is anything over 8 inches. And so I've managed to avoid any sort of ticket by educating them on what the weed is. But I have no idea what wording the township would use in order to change that law. And I see that you are offer consulting for that, but I don't know that as an individual homeowner, I'd be able to afford that. So how would I find that information to put together a brochure or a pamphlet?
Well, you can email me and I can help you with that. And I'm not going to charge
That
you.
would be
I
awesome.
You can reach me at Jennifer@GreenTownConsulting.com. I don't charge homeowners. That's not what I do. My goal with this is to work with municipalities or homeowners associations. One thing I do want to point out, if you go to GreenTownConsulting.com, I do have a blog post on designing gardens even skeptics will love. And sometimes there are things you can do that I'm not saying it's perfect. There's always going to be that one neighbor that just is antagonistic to the whole concept, but there are a lot of landscaping designs that techniques that you can use to make your garden look a little more like a classic garden. And that makes a big difference to people. It makes a big difference to people. So, just helping them see that it's a defined space, that it's a tended space, that makes a difference. Now, if you're trying to make a whole huge field in your backyard, that's difficult, but you can still find ways of doing it. So I would invite people to look at that blog post. I can put that in the chat for people.
I actually did that while we were talking.
Okay.
I went through there. So no, I have 7 different areas in my yard. They're all well defined. They're all underneath the tree or in a specific place. They're edged, they're mulched. He just finds it very messy looking, even though I've got 80% lawn still, even with all those areas. So the code enforcement was very, very nice and willing to work with me, but I would have to go to the township to have things changed. And they had no advice for what wording to use. And I know there's other municipalities that have adopted very native friendly policies, but I don't know how to find them and put them together.
Well, this is me. You can email me and I can help that, or you can put them in touch with me, whichever you prefer. But I can do that. A lot of my process with towns, and again, I just started this in April because I was like, more than Corinth needs to know this. So I'm very much at the beginning of it, but I've been doing consulting for 5 years with healthcare vendors. So I'm very comfortable with the process. And one of the things I do is help people go through their policies and say, could there's something we could do here? Is there something here? What are the definitions we could bring in? And then give them something so that they can take that information to their lawyer. Because again, laws vary very greatly around the country. So, and say, how do we make this legal for here? Or is it possible to do this here? Is there a reason maybe we can't? There is a reservoir near my home that I'm like, why is there this big patch of grass there? And it turns out it's a DEC requirement. So it's a federal law. There's nothing, it's because it's a reservoir and they need that for that area. So there's nothing to be done about it. And there's a reason for it. So I don't know that I would push back on that because I think there's reasoning there that's logical. So a lot of what I do though is also give them resources and give them wording and give them samples that other towns have done. I've been spending months amassing what there is out there, which, it's mainly resolutions, but it's a start. So if you want me to talk with someone in your town, I'm happy to do it. I can try and give you some of the information I have as well. So, the more we can get people understanding this, the better. But I also want to say, unfortunately, you can't necessarily make your neighbor happy. And that is really one of the reasons to help change the policies at the local level, because then it doesn't matter if they're happy or not. Then they just have to deal with you like you have to deal with them. And the nice thing is that unlike people who are spraying their lawns where that spray lands on your garden isn't hurting their lawn at all. So, and somebody just asked for I just put my email address right in in the chat. So, or let's see, maybe I have it here and I can show it to you if somebody asked for that.
GreenTimeConsulting.com.
Yeah, let me see. Jennifer, it's Jennifer at Green. I should have this right here. Hold on. I'll share my screen again real quickly for everyone. So here I am. This is, you can call me, you can email, you can schedule time on my calendar, whatever, but this is it, Jennifer at GreenTownConsulting.com.
Thank you very much.
Sure. Good luck with that. That sounds like a struggle.
It's been an education, so we're good. Thank you very much.
Okay. And I see that Peter has put in a question. Is there a guide for presentations to towns?
A guide for presentations to towns?
Mhm.
Do you mean like a guide on native plants for presentations, or is there like a guide for how you present to a town? I'm not understanding.
Can you speak to that, Peter?
How do I do that? Let's see. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So if we wanted to try to educate our towns,
Mhm.
first you got to find the right people. Then you got to try to figure out what to educate them on. And there's a lot of things to educate them on. So
Mhm.
is there like a template for me or someone else to try to work off of, to try to, and obviously you've given it tonight. So what you've done already is very helpful.
Well, one thing, if you want, I mean, I'm happy to give this presentation. Well, I have a slightly different version of it for the towns themselves. If they're interested, I'm happy to do that. That's never something I charge for. But one of the best things to think of is if you show up regularly, like the town council and the village council in my town, they meet twice a month. I, as much as I can, try and show up at each of them. It was easier when it was on Zoom, but it's a little more fun in person. But and I just go and I listen. And after a few weeks, you start hearing kind of what's happening in the town and what you can do. And I started originally by just saying, hey, is there any way we could put in a pollinator garden if you're trying to make that into a park? Or, you know, as I said about, well, is there any way we could make a recycling drop off for that? You know, things like that. So the easiest way is to listen and then see what's already going on in your town and start with that, or decide, okay, there's nothing going on in my town. And I really think if we had a pollinator garden here, or if we changed the nuisance laws, that would be a help. So then just raise the issue and the public comments and just say, you know, I really support pollinators and I'm concerned that if I put in a pollinator garden that it will violate a nuisance law. Is it possible to rework that so that we can make sure that native plants and pollinators and pollinator gardens are not lumped under nuisance or weeds? You know, you can say that. That's very straightforward. That could help a lot of people.
Yeah. Well, thanks.
Okay. I hope that helps a little.
And Barbara, did you want to talk about your Louisville, Kentucky native plant friendly ordinance?
I would love to see that.
Sure. So what we did was we had a 10-inch rule, I think, or was it a 7-inch rule, Hart? I can't remember. Hart and I are both on here. So we talked to one Metro Council person and she was interested in introducing it, but then a couple of us, retired biologist professor from U of L, Margaret Carrero, and I looked at other weeds ordinances. We tried not to call it the weed ordinance because that got confused with marijuana. So we called it the weeds ordinance. And we looked at the Minneapolis one because we liked that a lot. And at the same time, sort of, the mayor's office had one of Margaret's students, PhD students that had graduated and was working in sustainability. And fortunately, she helped us a lot. So she did all the negotiating. We didn't get everything we wanted,
Okay.
but we have to have a perimeter around the whole property that's either mulched or grass, or that your neighbor has to agree with pollinator, you know, with native plants. But it is a good ordinance and we are pleased. So we somehow we got like the head of the Metro Council to co-sponsor it. We were shocked because when we met with him on Zoom, he like, well, I wouldn't want a native plant garden next to my property. And then all of a sudden he was sponsoring it. And I don't know what happened in the back room. I mean, you never really know. But we're grateful.
Yeah, well, it's a phenomenal start. And I would say to you and to anyone else, if you, I would love it if you would email me a copy of the laws that you have, because I try and keep a resource thing, because that's what towns want to know, is what are other towns doing? And it gives them a starting point. They can edit it to work for their town, but any of that you have, that if you're willing to share, I would very much love to know about it.
And if you just go to Louisville, Kentucky weeds ordinance, it would come up.
Okay,
In your Google search, but
Wonderful.
thank you.
Thank
Sure.
you. And that's pretty much our comments with Stacy commenting. I'm glad you're doing this work.
Rosemary,
Yes,
can I just ask one more question?
of course.
Jennifer, thanks. What is an example of a sign of progress that towns or mayors or whoever it is in charge, what do they see as a success?
You mean, what does the town see as a success, or what do you?
Yeah, how can they sell progress? Like more butterflies?
You mean to the homeowners, or to you, to the town?
To citizens, to people in their town.
I think, it's one of those things that isn't an easy sell. In marketing, we always talk about how people need to hear something 10 or 12 times before they're even going to pay attention. And we talk about how you have to get inside the person's head before you can start talking. You have to understand what they're already thinking. So it's really hard, because we're all kind of advocate oriented, we're all activists, or we wouldn't be part of this group, right? But you really need to listen, because you need to find out in your town, what are people saying? Are they afraid of their property values going down? Do they not have the ability to maintain it? What if they love pollinator gardens, but they refuse to put them in because they don't know how to maintain them? They don't know how to garden like that. What if they just simply don't have a landscaper who can handle that? So a success is, to me, listening for what your particular town needs and making a little step forward with them. I spent my whole life trying to make big sweeping changes on things. And that's what I did with my original pollinator garden in my very first home. And it was a fiasco. It was too big. But now I've been taking tiny little steps. And those last. They're not flashy, they're not all, ooh, look what we got done. It's a little bit, but because it's a little bit, and because it's grounded in what your community is willing to hear and what you've been listening for to understand that, it lasts. And I think, we see so many times in our country right now, where people just swing from one pendulum swing to the other, and back and forth, and nothing sticks, and no one makes progress. And I get concerned about that with pollinator gardens, because what happens, and I mean, I've read cases of this, and I've seen this in other situations as well, where one group will put in a big pollinator garden, but the education wasn't there, the understanding wasn't there, the commitment wasn't there. And once they're voted out of office, it gets sod laid down on top of it. Or people don't understand, because no one explained to them that they're not going to bloom for 2 or 3 years. So they think it's a failure, and it didn't work, and it was too much money, and it was a waste, and they dig it all up. So those little baby steps that help you communicate and help you build that understanding make a difference. They really do. I mean, when I tried to start planting a pollinator garden on the neighborhood strip where I live, and at first I didn't get permission to do much from the town council, but I kept at it, and they had a new election, so the new town supervisor had no problem with it. So now we have a very pretty garden started, but it's expensive. So I bought plugs, at like $5 a piece. And so they were this big, and I printed out flyers just on my home printer and handed one out to all of my neighbors and said, yay, we're doing this, but please be patient. To save money, we got tiny plants, and you're not going to see blooms for a little bit, but this is what to expect, and this is how we're doing. And my neighbors have been really happy about it, even though some of these plants, especially some of them got eaten, so they're still this big after the whole summer, but they're supportive of it. And some offered to help contribute to it. And I said, no, the town paid for the plants, so we don't need that. I just, we want people to support it. So Peter, I totally hear you. You want to make a big difference and you want to make a change, but sometimes listening first and making a small change, it gives you that foundation and it's more solid and gives you something that will stick with you. So that's what I would recommend.
Make it good.
There
Thanks.
you go. Sure.
Okay, so Hart Hagen, did you want to share the weeds ordinance on your
Sure.
screen?
Yeah, let me see. Yeah, I tried to copy this into the chat, but it wouldn't let me. But I can share my screen if you want.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see.
You stop sharing.
So can you see that?
Yes.
This, I wish I could send you the link. Jennifer, I'll send it to you through
Just put it in
email.
the,
Otherwise, I don't know how to send this electronically to anybody, even though I'd love to.
Okay.
But
You can put that below and just paste it right there and it'll go to everyone.
well, I've tried to paste it several times and
Oh,
I couldn't for some reason. Copy.
Is that the old one, Hart? Oh,
Well, okay, so let me go back in the search and I'll tell you how to get to it. So when I've searched for Louisville, Kentucky weeds ordinance, this down here, it says section 156.02 exterior property areas. And then when you click on that, it pulls this up. And then this section D here is the pre-existing,
Here, I'll send it the link to everyone.
okay.
There you go. It's in the chat now.
Okay. Wonderful.
So
that's-
this one was the old one was very, vague and unhelpful. That's section D. And then what Barbara and others got done was section E, managed natural landscape. So
there you go.
if you have time, I can
That's
D,
beautiful.
weeds. All premises shall be maintained free from weeds or plant growth in excess of 10 inches. Now, be ready for this to be frustratingly vague. All noxious weeds shall be prohibited. Weeds shall be defined as all grasses, annual plants, and vegetation other than trees or shrubs, provided, however, this term shall not include cultivated flowers or gardens. So cultivated is a key word there. Cultivated to me
Yep.
mean like what I think one of our colleagues said, they want to hear that it's managed and maintained, but cultivated flowers and gardens. Any plant growth exceeding 10 inches in height on land of more than 3 acres that abuts another parcel which contains a dwelling or commercial building thereon other than crops, trees, bushes, flowers, or other ornamental plants shall be at least 50 feet from the property line or 200 feet from an occupied structure, whichever is less. It's maddening. To me, that's just maddeningly vague. And then section E, managed natural landscape. As an exception to section D, an owner, authorized agent, or authorized occupant of any privately owned lands or premises may, consistent with this subsection and all other applicable laws, statutes, and rules, install and maintain a managed natural landscape, such as native plantings, meadow vegetation, prairie, or rain garden, as long as the following requirements are met. I won't read through all those, but Barbara, what are the highlights there?
well, it has to be managed and maintained. That was said over and over because the Metro Council people wanted to keep saying, oh, this is going to happen, that's going to happen. And, what it comes back to is managed and maintained. I think, we have a sign that our soil and conservation, water, soil and conservation district put out. The code enforcement people actually had a training on what is a native plant. Because we all know that a lot of native plants have weed at the end of their names, you know, ironweed and,
pie weed.
you know, so, you know, one code enforcement officer before the weeds ordinance was passed said, well, see, they're all weeds. It's right in their name.
Mhm.
Okay.
It does help to point out that a lot of our native plants, even, you know, with the word weed in them, are often used in Europe and causing problems there because they are not native. So it's all interesting perspective.
Okay, wonderful. Anything else? Any last minute comments before we close out for tonight?
They do encourage signage that says a sign must be posted on the property in a location likely to be seen by the public, advising that native plants are being established. So, and there's a, Barbara, did you mention there's a like a 5 foot, there's a 5 foot buffer, but it doesn't count if there's a privacy fence or something.
Mhm.
Or you're adjacent to another native plant too.
Okay. Mhm.
Yeah. And I do have a certain number of resolutions and other kind of language that you might consider. So if you do need some help with that, I can also give you some resources. But I want to thank you all for sharing that, because that is really helpful to me, because the more examples that I have, the better it is, because every town's a little different. So it's good to have options. So I'm glad you got that passed. That's great work. That's just great.
Can I bring up one more question? What I see as an obstacle is the International Property Maintenance Code. And that includes some weed definitions, and that's the top. And that is that's an ordinance that many jurisdictions just adopt outright. And it hasn't been changed in forever. And individual jurisdictions can change it. But if that was changed, that would have a great cascading impact.
That's an option too. That's an option too.
Yeah, but it needs to have some kind of effort behind it to get that to happen.
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's easier to reach your local group because they're just down the street usually than the International Association. But it's definitely, if you know them and you know where to reach out, you can email them.
Okay, this is Mary, and I have a comment about how you can interest people as well.
Mhm.
Can you hear me?
Mhm.
Oh,
Sure.
okay. I'm a master gardener in Albany, New York, and I'm responsible for the native garden in Voorheesville. And I just established it this year, and we had a big drought here. I didn't have to water as much. I didn't lose any plants. And what has happened is people, you know, my other fellow master gardeners have come and said, oh, wow, I like this plant. Is that native? Is that native? And now many of them, there's 20 in our group for these particular gardens, have wanted to start planting natives. And 2 other friends have seen that garden and seen my home garden and said, oh, Mary, will you help me? So to answer part of Peter's question, if you just maybe start planting some natives in your own yard and people start noticing and posting pictures, that's a small way of having an impact. And this garden with the native plants, I planted in May, and I would say at least 10 people have come and wanted to start changing over to natives. Some still think cultivars are natives, but I'm a strict species native plant person. So, you know, when you say, how can I do it? Because I live in an HOA and it's just like their brains are in concrete. But when they see my home garden, many of the people say, wow, that's really good. And could you help me in my yard? So,
Mary, that's a beautiful point, because really there's nothing like beauty to speak for it, because people, I think, are imagining weedy, empty lots. And you know, in my neighborhood, we have a couple of people who I think believe that they're trying to support pollinators, and they just stop mowing. And of course, that is not really helpful. but I think they're trying to help. So when people see it done beautifully, and I've seen some local gardens that are native that are stunning, and I'm hoping one day mine will be among them. But I think that does speak to a lot of people. And if you have images that you can also take to your town and say, it can be this beautiful and it's less maintenance, or it's different maintenance. So it's, sometimes I don't say less maintenance, but you can say it's not any more maintenance, it's just different. Then that is something that you can do. So yeah, making it beautiful. So you're a master gardener, that might be easier for you. So that's
Yeah, but this is like in my HOA too, which, as I said, their brains are like in concrete. Myself and two other residents, one who was a master gardener, Jan.
Mhm.
We were, what do you want to say, commissioned to come up with plans for the 2 circles, which we have, you know, at cul-de-sacs. And they decided they didn't want that. They were going to mow everything down, dig it all out, and put in a bench in the middle of grass on a concrete slab. Yes.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's like, oh, everything else costs too much money. And the company that mows our grass doesn't want to have to go around gardens.
Well, but again, this is why you have to listen. What they're saying isn't that they don't like it, it's that they can't manage it. So
Right.
sometimes the thing that can be most helpful isn't planting the garden, it's helping them find a landscaper who can mow around it and doesn't have a problem with that. So that's why I'm saying you have to stop thinking like a homeowner and think like a town or an HOA. Their problems are different. They're often being paid very little or nothing, and they're doing it, you know, on top of working full time and having their families. They just want the mess off their desk. So if they have to mow it down and put in a bench, they might just do that. So
Okay.
the more you can listen to where they're getting stuck, the more you can help.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
That helped.
I was
You know, when you're really into gardening and you talk to non-gardeners, it's like polar opposites. So thanks.
Yeah. And I'm, you know, as I said, for years I was an HOA president. It is just a thankless position because everybody's upset. And the irony was when we moved here, we moved, and a year later, my husband was still on the email from it, and they were still asking for me because the new administration, the new people who'd taken over, were not getting anything done. And I reached out to our handyman that I'd found, and finding a good handyman if you're an HOA is like gold. And I'm like, what could be going on? This guy was brilliant. And he said that they never paid him on time, so he doesn't take their jobs anymore. So it's, you know, it's just a weird thing being an HOA, and some of them are not on top of it and they need help and they don't have time to find anyone, and they might just be sick of the whole issue. So just try and put yourself in their shoes a little bit, because, you know, somebody who's helping them is going to stand out and they're going to be a little bit more likely to work with you.
Okay, good points. Thank you.
Thank you. Great job with the garden.
Oh, yeah, it was really nice. It's about probably 13 by 50, and then another is maybe 12 by 20. So thank you.
Anything else?
I had a question, Jennifer. This is a little bit different, but we have a big problem with mulching improperly, over mulching in Louisville. I mean, I see it all over the country, really. Do
Big
you have,
mounds, you mean?
yes, well, you know, up against the trunk is, you know, my main peeve, and too deep is another peeve.
Mhm.
So do you have some suggestions on how to tackle that?
Oh dear. If it's on town property, I would think if you can put together a flyer and hand that out to your town council or email it to them, and also talk about it in the public comments and explain to them what is wanted. Ask if you can speak with their Department of Public Works and why it's not good. Again, what you're going to find in your towns is this is the way we do it. And we like the look of it. Like our town is like, you know, Jennifer, for your pollinator garden, we would be happy to contribute some mulch. And I said, your mulch is all dyed. I don't want that in my pollinator garden. And I'm like, that chemical leaks into the soil, you know, that affects the plants. And they were like, oh, we haven't thought of it. So, but they understood. So sometimes they just need a little education, and then a hint, and you might be able to say, if you don't mulch as high or as close, you are going to save on mulch. So that's a possibility. You can also point out that dyed mulch costs more as well. So people get used to a certain look, and that's just a fashion. And, just a little nudge to help them think. I mean, that's, I'm listening to this webinar on Friday, and Doug Tallamy was speaking, and he was saying how we have to stop thinking about it just being, beauty, that we're actually trying to create a space here, for other living creatures. And that's part of what we're doing, is helping them think, yes, it is pretty to us, but it isn't pretty, or it isn't nutritious, or it's actually damaging to others, and get them thinking a little bit. But, baby steps, just give them information and give them an idea of how much they could save and go from there.
Yeah, the problem is it's not the Metro Council people that are doing the mulching or the public works. It's they're hiring some other person. I mean, this happens all over, that it's not that Kroger doesn't know that, their trees were planted improperly, too high, and mulched too much. It's that they had some landscape
Right.
person come and
So
do
this
it.
is a property manager thing. You mean it's not the actual town, it's like private businesses? So-
Both, no, both. I mean, it's,
Well,
they're
but they're two different
contracting with
issues.
someone.
No, it's two different issues. If it's a town, they still have control over their contractors, and you can point that out, that they don't want that, or that they shouldn't want that, and encourage that. And it's not going to be a one-off conversation. It's going to take a while. I have tried reaching out personally to chambers of commerce to try and reach out to property managers, and I've had no success with that at all. So, you can talk with the landscapers, but they do it the way that people are asking them to do it, or at least they're not getting complaints. If they start getting complaints, they might be able to change that. So you've got to just start being the squeaky wheel at your town, or maybe even writing. I've written one of the things on my purple pollinator site, or templates, if you want to reach out to a business and say, hey, what if you don't do that? Because I've reached out to Hannaford, which is, a supermarket near me, and said, why is it all grass and non-natives all over your parking lot? What is that about? Who's doing this? And they never get back to me on it. But every now and again, I send them another letter and I follow up. You just got to start where you can start, but it's a long process. We're talking about, 50, 100 years, probably a couple hundred years of people thinking grass is a status symbol, and that there are certain ways you do this to make it look pretty. So, but all we could do is start where we are. Every little step is a step forward. That's all you can do. And I think it will be enough. So just pace yourself. Just pace yourself.
What I tell homeowners is to have it in their contract. And then I tell them and they'll go, I told them not to do that. And I say, call them and make them remove it. And I bet they won't do it again. If they have to go back and fix it, it's not likely they'll keep doing it.
Very possibly, if they see the connection. So, and I think someone in the chat pointed out that you might be able to get some infographics about that from your cooperative extension. That's a great idea too. So thank you.
Okay, anything else? We'll wrap up. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us tonight, Jennifer.
It was a
wonderful
pleasure, everyone.
presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, take care. Good night, everybody.